And so we're meeting here today to have the lovely Marwa tell us about an ascribed identity, the experiences of Middle Eastern Muslim women on college campuses. And I'm going to drop in the chat the evaluation. We'll also post it at the end. But just so you have it, and we love getting your feedback so that we can always be improving as an organization, and our presenters can continue to develop their work as well. And I think I've covered everything I was supposed to, hopefully. So Marwa, you want to go ahead and start off?
Yes, of course. Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Marwa. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I'm in the Oregon State University College Student Services Administration Master's of Education program. And I also work there as a graduate teaching assistant. And yeah, I'm a graduate teaching assistant in the College of Pharmacy. And I do advising and admissions work for the College of Pharmacy there. A little bit about my presentation style. I feel like I need to give these disclaimers for people to not be surprised. I really appreciate audience engagement. I really like in-person presentations because I feed off of the energy that the people in the room have. I like engagement. So at any point during this presentation, just go ahead and unmute, interrupt me. That is totally cool. We will keep the chat open for any reactions, reflections, any thoughts that come up. You can engage with each other in the chat. I will not be monitoring the chat, but if any questions come up, Shannon will ask me to pause and we will answer those questions. I also ask that you keep your video on if you're able to. I would love to see your faces and just get to interact with you all. Thank you. Awesome. So I'm going to start with a little bit of background about me and kind of why we came into this space today. So a little bit of background. I was born and raised in Iraq, small country, very safe. Nothing happens there. Also, I'm very sarcastic in case you can't pick up on that. I also lived in Syria for a year as a refugee, and I came into Portland, Oregon in 2010. I've been living in Oregon for 10 years now, and during that time, I got my Bachelor in Science in Business Administration from Portland State University with a focus in management and leadership and HR management. After that, I interned in the University of Notre Dame, a Catholic private institution, very much the opposite of my undergrad. It was a very unique experience, thankful for it. I learned a lot, would love to discuss that at other sessions. And after finishing my summer internship, I immediately started the program at Oregon State, and now I'm in my final year, job searching. So if you like me today and you have an opportunity at your campus, hit me up. But yeah, that is my kind of background so far, and I'm really excited to chat with you all. The topic that I'm speaking on today is not only my lived experience as a Muslim Middle Eastern woman, but it's also a collection of research papers and projects that I've done in my program so far. However, I don't pretend to speak for all Muslim and Middle Eastern women. Some of us may hold while some of us hold similar race, gender, and religious identities, different backgrounds and personal values set us apart in our experiences, and it's important to recognize that. There are identities that I hold on top of my religious and racial identity that have allowed me privileges and disadvantages, and others hold different identities as well. So the experience that you may hear from me today differs very much from any other Muslim person. But I hope to share as much as I can today in order to give you information on how you can support Muslim students in your institution and just make you more aware of the topic. Since I am not speaking for everybody on this topic, that's why I also invite people who share these identities or hold knowledge and experience around this topic and around working with similar students to also contribute to the conversation. None of us is the expert in this room. I'm just sharing personal experience and collective experience that I have. and I'm navigating between multiple screens, so I apologize for that. I do have some expectations and guidelines that I would respectfully ask everybody to attempt to follow. As I mentioned, there's no expert in the room, so I would love for us to engage in collaborative learning by gathering information from each other's ideas and experiences. Also, another disclaimer that I will bring up topics of white supremacy, white privilege, and oppression, and how those dominant identities have impacted a lot of minorities. I'll talk about microaggressions that many of us have done at some point. I don't always talk about these topics with a positive tone or a flowery way. Oppression and the trauma it inflicts on people is very real, and the pain is very real. So speaking about it in toxic positivity and trying to put a pink filter over it is not going to do us any good in education and in recognizing that, and it may do more harm than good. So if at any point, so it's not my duty as a person of color, it's not anybody's duty in minority groups to make others feel comfortable when talking about our lived experiences. So if at any point you get uncomfortable, I encourage you to first challenge yourself to sit with that discomfort and reflect on the privileges that have led you to feel that way. I am not saying that you're a bad person for holding those privileges. Again, we can't help to be born in some of the categories that we are put in as a society. It just means that as a person who holds these privileges, you can reflect on how you utilize that and how you choose to view it and lead with it. So that's why I have over here, examine our privilege. And that's for everybody to think about. Just because you're from a minority race or ethnicity or gender doesn't mean that you don't have privileges in other categories. At the same time, I also want to promote growth. So I promise that this environment, at least I will attempt to create a growth and education mindset in this environment. If at any point you have a question or want to discuss any of the materials, like I said, feel free to interrupt and chat about that, or utilize the breakout rooms to talk to other people about it. There are no wrong questions as long as they're asked with respect and willingness to learn. And the same goes for reflections and any of the thoughts and experiences shared in these smaller groups. So I ask that we engage with respect and honor the stories that are being told today. By moving forward with the slide and everybody's in the room, I am assuming that we are agreeing to these. Okay. So a little bit of background. Actually, now we're gonna start with this. I just do things on the fly, like depending on whatever the audience is feeling, I'll do that. So what I'm gonna do first, I'm going to read you these statements. I do recognize that it may be difficult for some people to read it off of the screen, so I'm just going to read it out loud. And I want you to just reflect on them as I read them. When I come to the professor, he said, "I'm busy." But when other girl come to him after me, who did not cover her face, he talked to her. "Can I see your face?" the professor kept asking me, and I said, "I cannot show my face in class. My religion does not permit it." I go to her office and she says again, "Can I see your face? I think you have something wrong with your face." She closed the door to her office and I took off the face cover. She said, "You have a beautiful face. Why do you hide it?" I was afraid that if I did not show my face, she would give me a bad grade. On college campuses, wearing the hijab was seen as something brave and bold to do. You know, because that's what you do on college campuses. You define yourself and you do those kinds of things. But post 9/11, a lot of the arguments, I think, that women used for wearing the scarf, one was that it was a protection. You can't use them now because it's not protection. It calls attention to you. When a student asks me about my background and being an Arab Muslim, I never know if they're genuinely curious or just racist because I mostly experience the latter. When the student who was writing about Islamophobia didn't know the answer to a question about religion, they turned to me for an automatic answer. After the death of Osama bin Laden, I was approached by a classmate who told me, "I'm sorry for the loss of your uncle." So those statements are collected from research that I have done over the past year and from narratives that I've collected from the people in my life. All those have come from women identifying individuals and from students who have been in US higher education institutions. A lot of them are from international students, so those are taken exactly from their words. What I'm going to have us do now, I realize that I just gave it there with no preface, with no detail around it. And I just want you to kind of think about those statements, think about how they made you feel. And we're going to go into a breakout discussion. I want you to just be vulnerable in your thoughts as much as you can and honest with the other members in your breakout room. And think about how your thoughts, what your thoughts and reflections are on those statements as higher education professionals or students. And what are the examples that you have seen or witnessed of how higher education continues to oppress Muslim women? There are no right or wrong answers. This is pure reflection, kind of to get the conversation started. And once we come back, please be prepared to share in the chat some of the thoughts that came up and some of the examples of oppression that you have thought of. So any questions so far before we go into breakout rooms? All right, we'll have a lot to share once we come back. I know it could have been very difficult for some of us to share our feelings. I know I'm the type of person to just, do my reflection internally and just sit there with it. So I appreciate you all for challenging yourselves to be vulnerable and sharing those thoughts. Feel free to type into the chat anything that came up for you or to just unmute yourself and speak. This is going to be a time for us to kind of share some of the discussions that happen in our breakout room. And again, the intent for this space is to hold a safe space for education to create change. So we're just going to respect and honor people's thoughts and reflections. Unmute or chat whenever you're ready.
I can share something. So I shared this in my group and it was from a very, very long time ago. But it was with an event for international students, and we had some food that was there as a lunchtime event, and it was a build your own sandwich meal. And the meat tray had pork products on it with a limited number of tongs. And it's something that still bothers me today, that one, it was even ordered, and two, just how it was delivered. And it's something to just keep in mind when we have events and when we're working with people, when we're getting food, is to think of dietary restrictions, how food is being served, what is available, what's there, so that it's accessible and inclusive for all attendees.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing.
Jeanette, I'm glad you brought that up because in our group, I also had an experience around food. We hold a graduation party every year, typically around like Mayish, so it often falls around Ramadan. And I had like a whole fight with PSU Catering about being able to take home leftovers, like just buy some leftover boxes for our students and their families who weren't going to be able to partake in the food at the time we were holding the party. And we talked about that sort of in the context of how particularly public institutions will frame what are systems of oppression as like for people's best interests or in their own safety, and how the way it was framed to me is like, oh, no, it's not anything about the religious thing. it's a liability. And we see that come up sometimes in the sciences. Like I work in engineering, where Muslim women who wear hijab or niqab have friction sometimes with safety policies, or that is framed as, oh, it's a safety thing for you to do this experiment with loose cloth. And the way it's approached is very much like, okay, well, this is the policy, so you have to fix it. Not how can we work to accommodate this religious need with your identity as a woman scientist, as a Muslim scientist. So just interesting how they're not really framed as oppression, they're framed as safety, but it still ends up with that result.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that.
We've got one in the chat. Ida mentioned that we talked about how even if universities have great programs and policies for inclusion, microaggressions still happen, and they're so damaging and affecting students' mental health and persistence.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Another one says, the group discussed that what we take for granted in higher ed is dominant culture, like how or when offices are held, one-on-one advising, remote advising on Zoom, and how we can do better to anticipate student needs.
And I think all of this, kind of the comments that you're bringing up and the examples that are shared just highlight how privilege has become used, has been used as the norm for how we do our day-to-day lives. The US doesn't have an official religion, doesn't have an official language, yet so many things are made convenient by being automatically in English, catering to Christianity and many of its dominant sects. We have Christmas off, we have Easter off. We would never imagine of not having those days off. But there are people who don't follow these religions that have holidays and community events that are so valuable and important to them that have to go against the norm and the policy and the opportunities that have been set for them to get something that people are getting as part of the system. I often hear a lot from students when interviewing them for this project of how difficult it is for them to get Fridays off, to go and attend a Friday prayer at a mosque. For many Muslims, the day of worship is Friday. They go to a mosque, do a group prayer, and a lot of professors are like, but why should I give you this privilege? And really, it's not a privilege when other students have that use too, and it's called Sundays. We all have Sundays off because Christianity, for a lot of Christians, they go to church on Sunday, and that is a time that is made available for people. It's an intentional day off, but Muslims can't get like an hour excuse from class. So it's interesting to keep thinking about privilege and oppression and how they play into our norms and policies. Thank you for sharing that. Any other thoughts, reflections, examples?
Yeah, Marwa, I was going to jump in. Thank you so much for your comments and experiences. You know, I think for me, I mean, and for a lot of us, right, 9/11 was such a turning point. And, you know, what maybe was kind of a microaggressive space of just kind of pure ignorance prior to 9/11 now became a macroaggression, right? Like just a complete fear space of now, not only do folks not understand, you know, now there's this threat, this like that it's this underlying current. And, you know, you would think that by now that would have dissipated in some way, but I do think that a lot of the ongoing systemic reluctance to, you know, make these kind of accommodations is based in that really well-oiled fear-mongering machine that really still permeates higher education. And I don't know, I was in New York City during 9/11, and like it was just tremendous to me, the overnight experience of how, you know, Muslim people were treated just like the very next day. And
people that weren't even Muslims.
yeah, right. Sorry. We've got peanut gallery additions here, but yeah, people that aren't even Muslim, right? Like it's just this experience that is permeated. And I don't know, like, how do we undo this? Like how, I mean, it's just, it blows my mind. But yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, okay, I'll stop there.
I appreciate you bringing that up because I don't know if you all know Kim McEloney. She was the keynote speaker during last year's OWHE, and she's one of my professors in my program. And I wrote a book chapter for her class. And in that book chapter, I examined Muslim identities and their intersection for brown folks, women, and Black folks. And the segment about brown Muslims, it was basically making Islamophobia legal through the war on terrorism, equating terrorism with skin color, equating terrorism with different nationalities, with Islam specifically. We're not doing that now when white terrorists are doing multiple things in our country. We just had a suicidal bombing and nobody addressed that. Nobody said that through the war on terrorism, we're just going to equate it with whiteness, because that is not what this country was built on. This country was built on the advantages and the privileges that are being handed to white folks. And so through that war on terrorism, it was also a war on Islam. It was a war on multiple Asian countries, multiple Middle Eastern countries. And then it eventually led into the Muslim ban that we just came out of like a couple of days ago. Is any of that rational? Absolutely not. We can have a whole discussion about US policies and government shenanigans about Muslim people.
And to add on, Maureen also added into the chat, as an assessment professional, it's difficult to try to understand Muslim or Middle Eastern student experiences through the data. Obviously, we don't collect data on religion at the institutional level. And while we do collect race ethnicity data, I'm not able to identify students of Middle Eastern descent unless they are international students. This is a barrier to examining their experiences and abilities to be successful on our campuses unless we explicitly ask for this information in surveys.
Thank you so much, Maureen, for bringing that up. That was a huge part of my struggle in trying to find research and relevant experiences that I could enter into this, the projects that I wrote about Muslim students, because every time I look it up, it was only information provided about international students. And the international Muslim student experience, while there are some intersections with domestic students, it is completely different because, you know, they have the chance at the end of those 4 years or however many years to go back to their home country and not experience those microaggressions and those identity issues for the rest of their lifetime. The issues are still definitely very relevant during their time in the US higher education system, of course. And interestingly enough, that was going to be my next point. The data about Muslim people and the number of Muslims in the US is not collected by the census or any organization that you would expect to collect information about this. It's collected by the Department of Homeland Security. Let's just sit with that for a second. I laugh as a way of like relieving trauma, it's not a funny subject, but that's how I react to it. And yes, I'm seeing in the chat that a lot of Middle Eastern students get lumped with the white students too. And that's a form of erasure. Thank you for bringing that up. I do want to be conscious of time. I'm not the type of person to present a lot in a PowerPoint or in a presentation. I like to engage with folks a lot more than that. So you're going to see that I don't really have a lot of slides, but I do have a lot of resources that I will share with you all that hopefully can continue this work after this session. So even if I don't get to all of my information today, I'm not worried about that because I'll be sending you with a lot of homework, optional homework. You don't have to submit it, but it's there. I do want to talk about a couple of background information about this topic. So It is estimated
Real
by,
quick,
yeah,
Marwa, can I interrupt? We got one more in the chat.
go for it.
We talked a bit about 9/11 in my group too, and how there was an explosion of violence and aggression towards Muslims and those from the Middle East. My main observation was that it seemed like those stories had decreased in the past decade, but how white privilege keeps people like me isolated from those stories, but it doesn't mean that discrimination doesn't happen. This is a big thing I really learned in the past few years. Microaggressions and harassment happen in private spaces, and it makes it hard to know the scope of what the problem really is.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Yes, the way that it has been kind of pushed to the side, and a lot of this is very similar to stories coming from other BIPOC folks and people from marginalized communities. We don't talk about them enough. We don't ponder the impact of it because it makes us uncomfortable. It challenges white privilege. It challenges the white supremacy and the system that this country was built on. I really appreciate us kind of digging into that discomfort and taking opportunities to educate ourselves. So thank you for being here and for talking about those topics. It's still going on. If I go out in public right now, chances are pretty high that I will at least get a microaggression. And this is really an unfortunate coincidence with this presentation. There was an incident in Portland with an Afghan man being assaulted and having degrading comments about him being a Muslim by someone who attacked him at a gas station shop. So if you want more information, I'm not too familiar with the incident. I did see it on my social media and I didn't feel too willing to read into it. If you would like more information about that, definitely look it up. But it was an incident that took place this week in our state. So it's very, very common, even in a liberal city like Portland. Again, I'm very sarcastic. Going back to our background information, through the research that I conducted, there is an estimated 2.75 million Muslims by the Department of Homeland Security living in the US. And that number is expected to double by 2030. And 53% of Muslims living in the US would be under the age of 30 in 2030. So of those members who are under 30, many of them are going to be attending colleges and universities in the US. So that number is increasing, and we're going to have more contact with students, with Muslim students in our day-to-day life as higher education professionals. We know that for students to have a successful journey in their education, they need to have a sense of belonging and acculturation. Acculturation means the combination of one's own culture and assimilation into the dominant culture. It doesn't mean 100% assimilation, because that would be a loss of culture. It doesn't mean 100% being in your own culture, because that would be that would prevent them from succeeding in the dominant culture. It's a healthy mix of both for students who are bicultural or come from different backgrounds. This process may be very difficult for Muslim students to achieve, since there are factors influencing their acculturation, such as language, culture, socioeconomic status, gender, and religion, for sure. They are battling cultural and societal norms and struggling to fit into either area completely. This is a phenomenon that is called living in the hyphen as an American Muslim. So if you think about the word American Muslim and it's hyphenated, you're literally living in that hyphen. You're not fully American because you're not fitting the ideal image of what an American is supposed to be according to our society, and you're not fitting completely as a Muslim because you have been raised in the society that is very different from what we see as Muslim countries. So this phenomenon, the living in the hyphen, can cause Muslim youth to hide their identity in either space to avoid threats, avoid being recognized as Muslim, and avoid microaggressions in general. I do want to recognize that it's easier for men to hide their identity than women, especially women who choose to wear the veil like me. I can't just show up into this space and be like, I'm not Muslim, what? No. It's pretty obvious that I So it may be more harmful and more damaging for women who wear the veil to be in public. And the identity of a Muslim woman is not decided by her. It's very rare that it's decided by her, but society ends up deciding that identity for her. And we will talk about that just shortly. Let's see, just looking through my notes. And like I said, we kind of brought it up with the assessment and the way that we end up gathering data and research. Muslim students are marginalized, especially Middle Eastern students, because they're not able to check any of the boxes that will allow them to have a safe space for their identity and to identify their identity. There is no box to check for religion. There's no box to check for their ethnic identity. They have to check white because apparently that's what Middle Easterners are, but we don't have the privileges of white people. And so that can cause issues for a lot of domestic Muslim students. And that's why it's often assumed that if a student wears the hijab or if they're a Muslim, that they're automatically an international student, because like one of our commentators said, and I really appreciate that, that is the only data that we have gathered. And that's something that I hope that we can change in the future. So moving forward, no, we already did that. Okay, an ascribed identity. With the ascribed identity, I just want us to take a look at this quote real quick. Despite the complex meanings inherent in the veil and the existence of historical and anthropological research on the veil in Muslim dress, researchers seldom consult veiled women in order to understand how the veil functions in their lives. Indeed, scholars tend to ascribe meaning rather than describe the meaning of the veil has for women. This is a quote that I got from research that I did for classes, one of the classes being taught by DJ, who is one of our guests here. Thank you, DJ, for giving me a good grade on this paper and for being here today. So this phrase just kind of like summed up my life, because when I was, even in my own culture, we have cultural expectations for what a Muslim woman is. When being in American society and American culture, there are also cultural expectations for what a Muslim woman must be like. So it's defined by news outlets, media, stereotypes, labeling us, but it's rarely defined by people asking me, how do you feel about your identity and your experiences? Muslim women are often labeled as submissive, oppressed, quiet, and a person that needs to be saved. Now, I definitely want to say that there are instances where Muslim women are truly oppressed and they experience inequality and a lot of kind of being forced into marriages and things like that, but that is a minority that happens in a lot of different religions, and it's not necessarily an exclusive thing for Muslim women. I definitely want to recognize that that does exist, but that is not the experience that the majority experience. And it's something that people from different backgrounds and different religions also experience. So I just wanted to give that disclaimer. I'm not fully discounting those stories and those reflections. I'm going to check the chat real quick to see. Thank you, DJ. I appreciate earning the grade. Yeah, having us check white is a way of erasure and a way of telling us, no, but you do have privileges, but like, that's only on paper. You don't actually have privileges. Thank you for your engagement. Okay, so this brings me to white feminism. I don't like talking about white feminism. I like intersectional feminism, where it advocates for a lot of women of color and different causes, but white feminists are often trying to save the Muslim woman, trying to be an ally to her and get her to take off the veil. And this leads me into our next point, which is the experience of veiled students. It takes courage to put this piece of cloth on, especially in an environment like the US and our current political climate. And this is a choice that many women make because they want to be empowered and they want to be seen as representatives of a peaceful religion. Muslim women are the first group to face microaggressions due to their hijab, and they're often seen as objects to be saved. People tend to use the feminism or freedom of choice, or you're in a free country now, nobody can force you to do anything, to further drive that argument and the fact that you don't have a choice in this, like you need to conform to what we see as a liberated, empowered woman. I don't know about you, but I feel very empowered right now. I wish that I could be like in the middle of you, but I feel great when I put this on, and I feel like it gives me power to tell people, yeah, what you know about me is wrong, and this is what I choose to identify as. And even though I know that someone could kill me as I step outside the door, I'm still choosing to show up and be an excellent representation of my religion. So it's important to keep that in mind. And lastly, a quasi-ethnic identity. We talked about the checking the boxes and the way that information is collected about Muslim students. I do want to recognize that in higher education, we don't talk about religion because it's not something that we want to look at. We want to just be very secular when looking at students, but the way that Islam is as an identity to students, it's quasi-ethnic. So with the combination of cultural experiences and the way that the religion impacts their day-to-day life, it has almost become like an ethnicity to those folks. So that's why it is an identity that needs to be addressed in college campuses, and it's not only addressed through spiritual guidance. I know that a lot of religious colleges do some programming, and they're able to do some programming for Muslim students and students of different faiths. Public institutions need to do similar programming, and I do realize that they're limited in doing that because of federal laws and everything, but it is a resource that needs to be available for students because they need that community space. They need that opportunity to connect with other members in their community and to develop that identity. I'm going to talk about this real quick because you're going to have the link to it, so I don't want to go into too much detail about it. But after talking about all of this and saying all the microaggressions, all the different negative things, it's important to realize that there's no magical one-step solution. This country was created on the concept of oppression of people who do not fit certain descriptors, and we can't change that in one step, in one day, in one event. We can create a small change and take action in our everyday life to improve the environment and be more welcoming to Muslim students. We can create actions that will help us be allies and understand the struggle of those students and help them in creating community in their development. So what I did, and this is a big thank you to Kim McAloney. She was my professor for a social justice class, and part of our final was creating a learning module for professionals on how to engage in supporting students of different identities. So me being Muslim and having literally no other thing to talk about, I was like, I'm going to make a module for how to support Muslim students on college campuses. And I really would love to share it with you all today. So I'm going to get the link to that and drop it in the chat. And you can also find this link in emails that we will send later after this. Okay, so this module, it has a presentation, it has a first step, which is reflection prior. Can you all hear me? Okay, sorry, my audio is glitching on my screen. It has a presentation, it has a reflection that you can engage in prior to the module, and an article that you can read. And this article has some of the best summarized recommendations that I could find on the internet. And it's a fairly short article, so I highly recommend reading through that. Step 3 is how to implement it in your own programming and in your own department. And this can be fully customized to whatever you do. If you're in advising, how would you implement it in advising? If you're in programming, how would you do that in programming? And step 4 is a TED Talk and personal reflection. So I really encourage you to go through this, to reach out to your department and kind of guilt them into doing it. And I would be more than happy to help with that as well. Here is my contact information, and I am available for presentations in different departments, or if you just need to reach out to me and get more information, I'm more than happy to do that. But yeah, that is my formal presentation. I just want to have the rest of the time available for comments, reflections, questions, literally any thoughts.